My phone's email alert chimed as a new email came into my inbox. I paused the show I had been watching. Being recently unemployed gave me some time to catch up on some TV shows my friends recommended. How have I never watched The Walking Dead? I picked up my phone from the arm of the couch and glanced at the message. Security guard wanted for overnight position. I clicked on the link that took me to the page and my eyes bulged. $35 an hour. This position is for the overnight shift at the StoneBrook Mall on 18711 Fremont Way. The position will be filled on a first-come, first-served basis. You'll learn the position on the job. I emailed immediately. Just 2 hours after sending my application, my phone buzzed with a new email. I'd been accepted for the position. Report tonight at 10 p.m. for your first shift, the message read. A quick rush of excitement mingled with nerves shot through me. I hadn't expected such a swift response, nor to be starting immediately. StoneBrook Mall was an unremarkable structure on the outskirts of town, a relic of the 90s boom with its fading paint and outdated architecture. The mall had seen better days, and its current state reflected a certain forgotten charm. As I parked my car under a flickering streetlight in the almost deserted parking lot, a chill ran down my spine. The place had an eerie stillness to it, a stark contrast to the bustling hub it once was. I made my way to the security office, a small, cramped room filled with monitors displaying various parts of the mall. A man in his late 50s with graying hair and a weathered face greeted me. He introduced himself as Hank, the head of security. "First night, huh?" Hank said, his voice raspy from years of cigarette smoking. "Let me show you the ropes." The job seemed simple enough. Patrol the mall, keep an eye on the CCTV cameras, and report any suspicious activities. Hank handed me a heavy set of keys and a flashlight. Most shops are closed, but a few late-night food joints and the cinema on the upper floor stay open till about midnight. You'll mostly be dealing with teenagers trying to sneak in after hours or some of the homeless looking for shelter. As Hank continued, my attention was drawn to one of the monitors. Camera 7, pointed towards a dimly lit corridor near the food court, flickered unnaturally. "Ah, don't mind that." Hank noticed my gaze. "That camera's been acting up. Probably needs fixing." He clapped me on the back. "All right, I'm off. You'll do fine. Call me if anything major happens." Left alone, I settled into the chair and started my vigil. The first couple of hours passed uneventfully. I took occasional walks, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, my flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. The mall had a different feel at night, like a sleeping giant. On my third round, I heard a noise. A soft whispering coming from near the food court. My first thought was teenagers, as Hank mentioned. I quickened my pace, turning the corner sharply. The food court was empty, chairs upturned on the tables, neon signs of the food stalls casting an otherworldly glow. The whispering had stopped. I scanned the area, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the deserted space. Nothing seemed out of place. Just as I turned to leave, a sudden movement caught my eye on the monitor displaying the feed from camera 7. I rushed back to the security office. The screen now showed the same dimly lit corridor, but there was a figure standing at the far end, barely visible in the low light. It was motionless, just standing there. I grabbed the radio. "Hank, I think there's someone in the mall." Static crackled through the speaker. Then Hank's voice. "Probably just a straggler from the cinema. Go check it out." I made my way towards the corridor, the sense of unease growing with every step. As I reached the spot, there was no one there. The corridor was just as empty as the rest of the mall. Shaking my head, I decided it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Or perhaps a trick of the light. I resumed my rounds, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But as the night wore on, the feeling only intensified, and with it, a sense of something deeply amiss within the walls of StoneBrook Mall. The night wore on, the silence of StoneBrook Mall becoming a palpable entity, wrapping its fingers around me. Each step I took echoed through the empty corridors, amplifying my sense of solitude. My mind replayed the image of the figure from the monitor. trying to dismiss it as a trick of light or shadow. I returned to the security office, seeking the normalcy of the bank of monitors. I flicked through the camera feeds, my eyes scanning for anything unusual. That's when I saw it. On camera 12, the feed from the lower level near the old bookstore. There was a man, disheveled, his clothes ragged, sprinting as if his life depended on it. He kept glancing over his shoulder, terror etched on his face. What struck me as odd was his pursuer, a tall man in a dark suit, walking unhurriedly, a cane in one hand and an old, thick book in the other. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor amidst the chase. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and headed towards the location. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of adrenaline and apprehension fueling my steps. The cold mall air bit at my skin as I moved swiftly, my mind racing with questions. Reaching the lower level, I slowed, my breaths echoing in the deserted hall. The bookstore loomed ahead, its windows dark, the once vibrant displays now faded and forgotten. I glanced around, trying to locate the two men from the monitor, but they were nowhere to be seen. The silence was suddenly broken by a low, throaty chuckle echoing down the corridor. It was chilling, devoid of humor. I shined my flashlight towards the sound, revealing the man in the suit standing at the far end of the hall. He was alone now, the disheveled man nowhere in sight. I called out, "Hey, you can't be here. The mall's closed." The suited man turned slowly towards me. His face was obscured by the brim of a hat, shadows playing across his features. He didn't respond, just stood there, ominously silent. I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively resting on the radio at my belt. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." As I drew closer, the man in the suit opened the book he was holding. The pages seemed to flutter of their own accord, stopping on a page that glowed faintly in the dim light. My eyes were drawn to the page, strange symbols and text that I couldn't understand dancing before me. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, the hallway spinning. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. When I looked up, the man was gone. Vanished as if he had never been there. Shaken by the encounter, I shook off the dizziness and steadied myself. My duty as a security guard, mixed with a pulsing curiosity, compelled me to pursue the enigmatic man in the suit. I radioed Hank again, but the static response was no different than before. I was on my own. I followed the path I had seen them take on the monitor, my flashlight cutting through the mall's oppressive darkness. The silence of the mall was now a heavy, expectant hush, as if it were holding its breath. Turning a corner, I reached the central atrium. The sight before me halted me in my tracks. The man in the suit stood there, cane in hand, book open and glowing ominously in the other. The disheveled man was on his knees before him, pleading. "No, please! I've done everything you asked!" cried the disheveled man, his voice tinged with despair. The man in the suit's voice was cold, emotionless. "Your time is up. Asmodeus does not tolerate debts unpaid." In a swift motion, he tapped the cane on the ground. A surge of energy seemed to ripple through the air. The disheveled man screamed as his form began to contort and shimmer, his essence being drawn out and into the book. It was a horrifying spectacle. Not just the act itself, but the realization that I was witnessing something beyond the natural realm. I couldn't move, frozen in shock and horror. After a moment that felt like an eternity, it was over. The disheveled man lay motionless on the ground, a lifeless husk. The man in the suit closed his book calmly, as if he had just completed a mundane task. Only then did he notice me, standing there, wide-eyed and petrified. "You should not have seen this," he said, his voice a mix of annoyance and indifference. "What? What are you?" I managed to stammer out. "I am but a collector," he replied. "A collector of debts owed to my employer, Asmodeus. A demon." The word echoed in my mind, an absurd yet the only explanation that fit what I'd just seen. "Your involvement ends here," he continued, beginning to turn away. "Forget this night if you value your sanity." He started to walk away, blending into the shadows. Panic and a sense of duty battled within me. I couldn't let this entity simply walk away. I reached for my radio, but then hesitated. Who would believe this? Who could help? As I stood there, conflicted and overwhelmed, the mall's silence returned. The man in the suit was gone, leaving me alone with the lifeless body and 1,000 unanswered questions. The rest of my shift passed in a daze. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the mall's skylights, I realized my world had changed. I had peered behind a veil that few knew existed and was now privy to the darker undercurrents of reality. I left the mall as the day shift guards arrived, their casual chatter a stark contrast to the night's events. I drove home, the image of the soul being ripped away replaying over and over in my mind. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't return to StoneBrook Mall. Some truths are too heavy to carry, and some debts too dangerous to witness.